If we could move on to question number 2. And here we're talking about how can we accommodate anticipated growth. I think perhaps an interesting question at the moment. And for that reason, I'm moving question 7 across to be considered at the same time, which is what approach should we take for vacant shop units, because I think they're the flip side of the same coin. And certainly during different economic cycles, there may be things that need to be considered that operate across the range of economic cycles that we're likely to have during the plan period. Does anyone want to comment against that?
Hi, I'm Paul Cutts. I'm the Chief Executive of Exhibition Road Cultural Group, of which the City Council is a member. I'm particularly interested in what the Council's policy might be on empty retail units in the cultural context. We've talked a lot about how we create community cohesion. We've talked about affordable housing. And culture plays a very particular role in generating mood and atmosphere and encouraging footfall to the retail offer. I'm quite interested in what, if any, policy the City Council has on that in the cultural context, and how that can inform the economic growth of an area. I mean, we can all point to studies of how culture helps is a multiplier in terms of economic development and growth. And Shaftesbury obviously has done a lot of work on that in turning over certain spaces for cultural activity. And there have been some interesting examples in your neighbouring borough of Kensington and Chelsea, where commercial landlords have handed over empty retail space to cultural activity. I mean, such as the Brompton Quarter, which has created a temporary exhibition space near South Kensington Tube Station, which has proved to be very successful. So, from my perspective, from the sort of cultural industries, I'm very interested in knowing how high up your priorities list the use of culture might be in that sort of context, given the added value that it can bring to the economic and retail business.
Well, I think that's a good point. I sort of take from your comment that you're suggesting that where there are vacant units, that cultural uses might be an appropriate policy response to that, particularly on a temporary basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some very interesting examples of how temporary spaces have really captured the imagination and actually generated a lot of additional free marketing for areas as well. And there are some very interesting things that have been done in terms of artists in residence in empty retail units, graphic design, all of those sorts of areas which actually support the surrounding retail offer but give it a different twist and a different perspective. I think it helps generate a very particular atmosphere and mood for spaces. And I think, and in the context of your neighbours, Kensington and Chelsea, who've just placed that sort of strategy at the heart of their new cultural development strand, it would be interesting to think that we could have some cohesive thinking across neighbouring boroughs to enable that sort of development.
Okay, well, we'll definitely take that forward as an approach, a suggested approach for the policy.
Yeah, I was just wondering what thought you might be giving to what we particularly have got long-term vacancies, to opening up the possibilities of accepting uses other than retail. This, in some ways, of course, does trespass into question 3 as well. But
that's right.
Just to give again a bit of background information, the current UDP policy in relation to vacant units actually requires a unit to be advertised, if you like, as an A1 use for 18 months. And I don't know if people feel that's appropriate still to take forward, or if maybe we should shorten that time slightly, or provide a bit more flexibility. So there's potential, for example, after a year, maybe we could allow a different kind of use, perhaps within the A-class uses, a cafe or something similar.
Just to come back on that, of course, that policy doesn't necessarily apply in all the streets, does it?
It's more intended for periphery locations.
The gentleman.
I was just wondering if the council was giving any thought to extending widening the special retail area in terms of anticipated future growth. We've talked about the traditional suspects, Oxford Street, Regent Street, Bond Street in particular. This surely is a cause for a wider shopping loop in the wider Westminster area.
It's something we could definitely look into. Obviously, if you would allow retail to grow, that would be at the expense of other uses. So, for example, the heart of the CAS area, so shown in the red boundary here, there are residents there, other entertainment uses, for example, other commercial activities. So obviously there would be some kind of trade-off between provision of retail and provision of the other uses. Perhaps retail growth may be able to be accommodated at upper floor levels. You've mentioned before the issues with the upper floor levels, having too many uses in one property. But we may be trying to look at more innovative ways of accommodating growth, perhaps within the existing buildings, opening out buildings, providing bigger floor space or in certain areas, not necessarily growing areas as such, although that's clearly a possibility.
Have you got any specific areas that you consider have been too tightly constrained in the current boundaries that we've drawn, that you would look to for expansion of?
There are a number, but I suspect you'll need to take some consultation on that.
Okay, if you just write into us, we'll be happy to have a look at those and circulate it more widely. Okay. No, oh, yes. Anyway.
Just on the growth question again, I think interesting comments about differentiation and culture, importance of culture, and we would support that absolutely because we're an international destination which has got to be different basically, and policy has to somehow reflect that diversity and innovation in it. Clearly, as Savile Row is noted as a place where there's artisan workshops and showrooms, that's absolutely right and should be protected. I'm just wondering, are those showroom policies, if you like, sort of north of Oxford Street, near Marketplace, around there, are they still as relevant? Because there's quite a lot of showroom use there, which may be actually coming to the end of its useful life, because in 5 years' time, it's unlikely that a lot of those guys will be around. And does one have to refresh that sort of designation for those properties while keeping, the sort of Savile Row is absolutely intact?
We could definitely take that forward, but the officer who deals with showrooms will be at the commercial workshop rather than this one, I'm afraid, because the special policy areas are being dealt with there. So I'm not sure any of us can answer the specifics, but we'll take that forward.
I think that's an important point because it's screaming out that area. And as a planning authority, we've been giving more and more consents to change of use there, having been provided with proper evidence, and it's adjacent to as what we've identified as a major shopping area. So.
That's right. Okay.
Could I just go back to the vacancy rate, the issue of the long-term vacancy? I just wondered if there's potential for us to have a show of hands to see who would be in favour of shortening the 18 months timescale we have at the moment. Quite a few people. Are there quite a few people that are adamant that it shouldn't be shortened, or no strong views? Okay, thank you.
Certainly a mix.
Thank you.
Thank you.